So Plato is the second of the big three, Socrates, Plato, and Aristotle. And he's well known for being a founder of this kind of school of philosophy called the Academy. And so it can get described as an institution of higher learning. Seems like it's probably not a university or anything like that, but people come to study the big ideas. And I'm not entirely sure whether he would have charged money. Certainly, since Socrates and Plato were sort of down on the surface, they may think that you shouldn't be charging money. But on the other hand, then you wonder, well, how did he make a living? He did come from a wealthy family, so maybe he was just like a trust fund kid and was able to keep on uh, doing his stuff without charging money. Uh, that's, I guess, up for further debate. All right. Certainly, Plato was very struck by the fact that his teacher, Socrates, was killed. And certainly he thought that it was an unjust death. And one, well, I don't know if it was precisely an effect of that, but certainly it links into his dislike of Athenian democracy. One thing we'll see with Plato is that he doesn't think democracy is a good idea. He thinks it would be much better off to have everything run by philosophers. Now, we're going to be talking a lot about the world or realm of forms, and that's part of the idea that his theory is sort of extravagantly metaphysical. He totally wants to say this is realm beyond our senses, the world of forms, and we can just cannot see it, but we can know it intellectually, and that it's a big claim that there's a whole different realm of reality which we know with our minds. It seems not only metaphysical but almost a mystical claim. Now, while Socrates thought that he had not much knowledge, Plato thinks he has a lot of knowledge. He thinks he has a lot of answers. So there's a big contrast between the two there. He thinks that his theory of forms basically gives answers to a lot of the questions that they've been puzzling about. You can understand Plato's ideas partly by comparison with previous philosophers, especially the pre-Socratics. So you'll remember the contrast between Heraclitus and Parmenides. They seem to hold totally opposite views. Heraclitus says the fundamental nature of the world is change and flux. He can have said, like, or the fundamental element is fire. And so everything in the world is always changing. Whereas Parmenides says nothing is changing, everything is just static. Everything stays as it is, it never changes. So Parmenides thinks that the world, this truth cannot be understood through the senses, you have to use it through your intellect. So Plato says, you're both right. But you're right about different realms. So Heraclitus, he says, that's true for like the physical world. The physical world, everything is kind of impermanent, everything eventually kind of breaks, disintegrates, and humans the human bodies come and go. So that world is that's the world known through the senses, whereas the world known through the intellect, that he says that's the world of forms, that's unchanging, and it is eternal. And that we know through our intellect. So there he's taking those two pre-Socratic philosophers and saying, he's combining them into one view. He's also highly influenced by the Pythagoreans. So if you'll remember, the Pythagoreans believed that numbers and geometrical shapes are really the fundamental nature of reality. And the world is somehow profoundly mathematical. And certainly the world of forms for Plato at least contains all the mathematical truths. In some ways, they're some of the main examples of things which are totally unchanging and the most real things for him. Another part of the Pythagorean view is their idea that the soul is immaterial and different from the physical body. And more than that, that we need to kind of lead a life of the soul, not concerned with material things. And Plato totally adopts that kind of dualism. He thinks that the soul the soul is eternal, and it can actually ascend to grasp the forms by detaching itself from the distraction of the physical world and focusing on intellectual pursuits. So you start to see here, Plato thinks that the physical world is actually not something that we should be concerning ourselves with more than necessary. Obviously, you need to eat as a citizen, you need to do whatever it is you need to do as a citizen, but your fundamental concern should be with higher things if you can do that. Although also he thinks that not everybody can be a philosopher, so maybe not everybody is capable of doing that. Another element he takes from the Pythagoreans is the idea of the harmony of the spheres. He thinks that there's a sort of inherent harmony in the forms, and that they give a sort of structure to the physical world. We'll see more about that. All right, so we've already seen that Plato's view is very dualistic. It makes a strong distinction between body and soul and physical things and the world of forms. Also, he thinks that the world of forms and the soul are the most important, the most real things. He thinks that the physical world is really just a world of appearances. It's kind of shifting and is not something that we should kind of really be concerned with. So in his view, everything in the empirical world, the physical world, is basically an inferior manifestation of the pure form which exists in the abstract in the realm of forms. He also thinks that our experience through our senses comes from an interaction of the pure form and the matter in the world. One of the big questions for this kind of dualism, in any kind of dualism, is how do the two sides interact? If you think that the body is just physical and the mind is non-physical, how do something physical interact with something non-physical? That's not something that Plato really gives any answer to. What he does say is that the most important kind of knowledge is like the knowledge through the knowledge of the forms, knowledge through reasoning, not through the senses. One way he describes this and gets used a lot to describe Plato is the analogy of the divided line. And he thinks that, as we've seen with this dualism, the divided line separates out the two sides. And he thinks that the knowledge we get through the senses is ultimately not worth very much. True knowledge comes from intellectual understanding. He also wants to say that like the world of fiction and stories and imagining is just worthless, basically. and he really dismisses it. So he's quite hardcore in his approach. He's not going to be watching Netflix at any point. So here's a depiction of the divided line. You see the difference between like the physical world and the world of forms. And then he makes subdivisions within those realms. So the world of objects is the world of tables, dogs, trees, cars, birds, physical bodies. And we can have beliefs about that. As I've just said, the world of images is lower than that. That's like looking at painting and sculpture, reflection, the kind of the big dramas, the stories of the gods, the stories of Achilles. The one thing that is very almost shocking about Plato is that he would think that these stories that the Greeks prize so much and that we, when we're looking at Greek culture, we think are so great, he says they're worthless. When he writes his Republic about the ideal kind of state, he says you should ban poetry, you should ban art. He thinks basically you should just have kind of pure philosophy as much as possible, and then training people for what they need to do. So what he thinks is kind of real is like the world of numbers. That's good. Numbers, shapes. You have universals, kind of like ideas of kind of justice, maybe. And you have souls that are up in that higher echelon, and the kind of the most high level is goodness. So the ultimate form is goodness, and that really motivates everything. So there's this kind of idea of pure goodness he thinks is essential. But it's a very kind of austere view he has. So and he does give an explanation of this in his allegory or story of the cave. This is found in book 9 of his book, The Republic. And the idea is that you have people chained up, and they represent just regular people. They're prisoners. And behind them, there's a fire. And all they see is the shadows of things moving along a sort of moving belt, and those shadows are reflected on the wall. So all they see is the shadows. And they take those shadows to be reality. So it's an indication how regular people are just confused. They don't really see the truth. Rather, they just take shadows to be reality. Then he says one of the prisoners gets released, and they are able to leave the cave and go out and go up to the regular surface where the sun's shining and they can see ordinary objects. Initially, if you've lived your life in a cave, your eyes are used to the cave, and that means that going outside, at first it's going to be blinding. But then your eyes will adjust and you'll start to see things how they really are. And eventually, eventually you'll be able to see the sun, although it seems a bit of a stretch in the analogy because it's not a good idea to stare at the sun. But you'll be able to see that he thinks the sun is some way the highest point of reality. The true philosopher will be able to see that kind of reality. So he thinks of himself as a true philosopher, and so he thinks he's able to see these truths which regular people are not able to see. Then he imagines that this philosopher, this released prisoner, goes back down to the cave to give the other prisoners the good news about reality. Then he goes into the cave, but he's used to the daylight, and he can't see in the dark. And the other prisoners just laugh at him for stumbling around. And he says, I can tell you the true nature of reality. And they just laugh at him and say, you don't know what you're talking about. So he thinks that being somebody who knows the ultimate truth, it's actually very difficult to tell people the truth. They don't want to hear it, and they will just laugh at you for saying that you know about this realm of pure truth. So that's the allegory of the cave there. There are lots of useful videos about that. To go into a little bit more about this idea of the physical objects being copies of perfect versions in the realm of forms. He thinks that objects in this physical world are just kind of flawed imitations of the corresponding forms. That's going to be true of a tree, of a stone, of a blade of grass. The pure versions are all in the world of forms. They're the perfect versions, and everything on earth is less perfect. But any physical object in this physical world is what it is because it participates in the perfect form of that thing. So a particular beautiful painting is beautiful because it participates in the form of beauty. And he thinks that, thinking back to his allegory of the cave, prisoners in the cave, they mistake the shadows on the wall for true objects. So people kind of confuse the physical objects for being true, but they're not. So he has this idea that true knowledge really comes from understanding the forms through reason. And it's these forms which provide the kind of fundamental basis for all reality. And they really, it's the forms which give meaning and essence to everything that exists. And they serve as like objective truth. Plato is like totally against the sophists with their relativism. He thinks there's no such thing as relativism. All that we should believe in is objective standards, universal truth. And that's what's provided by the forms. All right. So his student Aristotle had objections to Plato's view about this relationship between the forms and objects. It's known as the third man objection. So what explains something being red? Plato says it's red because it participates in the form of redness. So that's his explanation. So suppose that he's right about that. We can ask, well, is the form of red also red? And Plato says, yes, it is. But then if the form of red is also red, how do you explain the redness of that form? And it seems that you can't say it's red due to itself. There has to be some other form which makes it red. And then you can ask, well, is that other form also red? And he has to say yes. So then it seems like now you've got into a chain of reasoning. So for every form, there has to be another form which explains its redness. So that leads to an infinite regress and seems to be a big problem for Plato. And here's a bit more how Aristotle put it. This is why it was called the third man objection. It used the idea of being a human being. So Plato says an individual man is a man because he resembles or participates in the ideal and perfect form of man. But then, so that perfect form of man is also a man. But so according to that principle, that means that needs to have a larger new group of men, the individual men plus the form of man. But that leads to a third man, appeals to a principle of one over many. So there must be a new separate form to explain what the members of this new group have in common. So that's the third map. Then it seems like this is going to lead you to an infinite loop. So the idea is that if you take Plato's explanation seriously, it leads you into an infinite regress, and so it can't be right. So that was Aristotle's objection to it, and it seems a sort of pretty smart objection. You might, I think, from what we know, it seems that Aristotle was totally aware of Aristotle. Plato was aware of Aristotle's objection, but he never really came up with a good reply to it. Not the one that we have seen. I guess another worry about his approach would be that if something is red because it participates in the form of redness, then how does it do that? It seems like it's a very kind of mysterious process. And he doesn't give us any explanation. Another view of Plato, which is very distinctive and became very influential, is the idea that all knowledge is not actually discovering things, it's remembering things, known as like the reminiscence theory of knowledge. So we don't get any real knowledge through sensory experience. So Plato has this kind of weird theory that the soul starts out with pure, complete knowledge. I guess it's partly the idea that the soul is unchanging and eternal, so the soul can't gain any new knowledge because it's meant to be unchanging and eternal. So his view is then we must always have had this knowledge. Therefore, when we come to know something, we're not actually learning something new, rather we are remembering something which is already in our soul. I mean, again, it seems a surprising view. If you think of a little baby, a newborn baby, Plato is saying this newborn baby in its soul has all the knowledge of the universe in it, all the deep knowledge. It's a surprising claim. So we call Plato a rationalist because he so much focuses on this idea of kind of intellect and rationality to gain knowledge. He's totally dissing all the sense experience. He thinks that doesn't really get you anything important at all. He's given the label rationalist. Let's say a little bit about his view of the self, which comes up a lot. And this is, in some ways, what he says here seems quite a lot like common sense. On the other hand, it seems maybe a little simplistic. So one of his main points is that we have a rational part of the self, and he clearly thinks that's the immortal part, that's what existed with the forms. But he also thinks we have these other parts, he labels them like the courageous part and the appetite part. The appetite part is easy to understand. People have hunger, they have thirst, and they have sexual needs. All these kind of bodily needs. That you think that's part of the self. But then there's this middle component, courage, to do with like your emotion, and he thinks that is to do with emotions like fear, rage, and love. I mean, exactly how he separates it out is like it's a bit vague and a bit mysterious, but you can see the basic idea that like we have these different parts of ourselves, and the whole point of living is in some ways to be rational, but you have to get control of these other parts of yourself. You can't let these other parts of yourself control you. You can't let your desire for food and for drink and for sexual pleasure and for having fun, you can't let that control you. You have to control it. Similarly, you can't let your emotions control you. You have to control them. So he uses this analogy of a charioteer, which is a illuminating analogy because if you've ever ridden a horse, you'll note that horses are big and strong. The horse is always stronger than you. So the idea, the charioteer is not stronger than the horses. Yet the charioteer has the ability to control the horses, not through strength, but through some kind of guiding, some kind of training. And the charioteer, when things are going well, is able to control those two horses, those powerful drives in you. So he thinks a life of harmony, a happy life, is one where you have control over your drives and your emotions. So there's a lot of emphasis in Plato, and actually it's also true about Aristotle, this idea that you have to learn self-control, and you have to be able to suppress your bodily desires. And you have to be able to kind of postpone and inhibit the immediate gratification. In some ways, that seems just like common sense, but he takes this idea pretty seriously, and it's one of his main themes. So we've seen he has this distinction between the body and the soul. And one thing that's pretty striking about it is that he thinks the soul is much superior to the body. The soul is eternal and unchanging, while the body is temporary, it's changing, and your senses don't, the senses you get through your body don't really give you any deep knowledge. Your body has all these sort of disgusting desires leading you away from true knowledge, the higher things. And so Plato says you have to sort of purify the soul by distracting it from the freedom from the body. I sort of wonder, would Plato be fun to hang out with? You know, he's not somebody you can go for a drink with. You know, he's going to be like, no, I need to kind of get it thinking about the higher things. It seems like he's a very kind of single-minded sort of guy. One analogy he uses is the idea that in living the life of a philosopher, you're focusing on the higher mind, and eventually, when you die, you'll be freed from your body. He has this idea that the body is a prison, and that seems like an especially kind of gloomy view of the body, that really you have this soul yearning for higher things, and your body is imprisoning it. And he is looking forward to the day when he dies, when his soul will be released from his body. And in doing philosophy and trying to think about the higher things, he is preparing for death. He's preparing for a life when he will no longer be tied down in this prison of a body. So it's quite a metaphysical view in the sense that he just doesn't seem to like life on Earth. Now, one striking thing is that the Christians, and this is several centuries later, he's writing in maybe the kind of around the 4th century BCE. Early Christians were writing maybe 500 years later and beyond then. But his approach definitely was like a ready-made framework to talk about the concepts that they wanted to talk about, like the immateriality of God, the immortality of the soul, and a higher divine reality. So at least for a while, the Christians were happy to adopt some Platonic ideas. They kind of liked the idea of the world of forms, which was kind of ruled by the supreme form of the good. And they kind of gave them a sort of analogy, a way of thinking about the way that God rules. So the idea is that God is not a physical being in space and time, rather God is beyond that. And they see the forms as a kind of divine set of divine thoughts or blueprints for creation. So that's an interesting analogy, and you can see why they were sort of interested in that sort of idea. And also, they would be happy with the idea of the immortality of the soul. They may not like some of the details of Plato's thought, but that they will like the general idea. Uh, and they would like the idea that the body was seen as a source of temptation and sin. You can see quite a strong parallel between what we might think of as Plato's puritanical attitude towards the body and the ideas of the Christians, who also seem to, at least to some extent, reject the pleasures of the body and say we should always be aiming for higher things. I think that in some ways that it's a fairly illuminating comparison. Let's think about a little bit about Plato's view of society and how that should be run. I've already mentioned how he was totally against democracy. He thought democracy was a terrible idea. Basically, he thought like democracy puts know-nothings in charge. And it's running things by popularity rather than by rationality. He has this sort of surprising analogy between the different parts of the mind and the different kinds of individuals in society. So he divides them up into three. So he thinks that the people who should be running things are philosophers. He calls them philosopher kings. So he thinks that the totally rational people should be running things for the benefit of the state. A couple of reasons. One is because they're so smart and they know that they know they know what's important, but also because they are not going to be tempted by bodily pleasures and earthly rewards. They can't be corrupted because really what they are just focused on is the higher things. So they're going to do things what they're going to do what's good rather than be swayed by their own benefit. Yes, I mean, immediately you think, well, okay, this may be his idea of how perfect society should be run, but it seems totally idealistic, right? I mean, like, is it really true that you can find a politician who isn't swayed by what's useful for them? It seems very idealistic. Obviously, for ancient Athens, their army, their soldiers were very important. And he says the courage part of the soul is analogous to the role of the soldiers. They don't need to be very smart. They need to be able to follow orders, and they need to be strong. They need to be good in battle. Then you need the kind of the workers and the slaves. And he thinks, well, those people, again, they need to be told what to do, but they need to be given orders. And they're the ones who just live for the day-to-day pleasures of the body. And so that's what they're good for, working as workers and slaves. One idea you obviously see here is that not everybody can be a philosopher. He thinks these things are just intrinsic. He doesn't believe that anybody can learn to come to be the king. He thinks that the most rational people should be kings. It's striking that he doesn't think that has to come from the most noble society, most noble family. He thinks it's like the smartest people. But the kind of one thing you might see here is like he thinks some people are just destined to be slaves. That's who they are. It's kind of their natural role in the best kind of society. They should be slaves. That's probably going to be set off some red flags for you, right? This guy is saying that slavery is justified. And that seems a problem. We think that slavery is totally wrong. So we see like Plato is saying that slavery is the best way to run a city, have slaves. And obviously, there's only certain sorts of people who are destined to be slaves. It's not the soldiers, it's not the philosopher kings, but some portion of society is destined to be slaves. Aristotle had a very similar sort of view, and he thought some people were natural slaves. So, I mean, those views were not, were by no means controversial. And this is a time when slavery was very well entrenched as part of society, and people totally accepted slavery. Even the slaves didn't necessarily want to abolish slavery. What they wanted is that they didn't want to be slaves and they wanted to be able to own their own slaves. So slavery was not something that was much questioned back then. But if we're looking to Plato as being the source of great wisdom, we might think, well, there's a bit of a problem there. So he definitely thinks people's lives are predetermined, their nature is predetermined. So that's a view, again, a view we probably don't really want to buy into. We think that people have more flexibility, people can learn, people can move up in society, but that's not a view that he advocates. He does also have this, this is more of a footnote, he has this idea about what happens when you sleep. He seems to be talking about dreams, and he thinks when you're dreaming, your rational self is kind of not in charge, and so it's just your the baser parts of your life which have free reign in dreaming. So I guess Plato was troubled by the fact that he would be dreaming of bodily pleasures, and his rational self was not enabled to kind of stop those. A couple of things worth mentioning. One is his allegory of the ship of state, which helps to explain his views against democracy. So he thinks democracy is like a ship owned by a deaf, blind, and ignorant owner. And you have skilled sailors fighting for the helm, despite lacking navigation skills. So he thinks that in a democracy, the people are persuaded by strong, eloquent individuals to gain power, rather than by true expertise in leadership and governance. So I guess that does sort of raise the question, is that a problem of democracy? Is it true that people can be swayed by non-rational factors? Can they be swayed by eloquent, powerful individuals? His criticism is like when that happens, that leads to a rudderless vessel, a ship going without any proper direction, and so it's going to end up sinking or crashing on the shore. So he thinks a democracy like that is a totally bad idea. There's also the idea, his ideas about love and beauty in his dialogue, the Symposium. In the Symposium, you have, it's like after dinner, normally they say they just basically drink a lot, go hard at it, and have a lot of fun. But this time, instead of doing that, they are going to talk about the nature of beauty and love, especially love. And so each person in this story gives their own view, and some are relatively well-known stories. And it's at the end, well, it's not quite at the end actually, but near the end, penultimately, the figure of Socrates comes in representing the views of Plato, and he sets up a very kind of striking conception of love, where we move up from the physical concept of love to the abstract world of forms. So he starts out with like the most kind of obvious kind of love, which is more like lust. It's the love of a single beautiful body. So you start out, the lowest rung in the ladder of love is that you have physical attraction to a beautiful person. Then you can moving up to get more abstract. You can love not rather than just loving one person, you can have a love of all beautiful bodies. So you can move beyond just one person and get a bit more general. Then moving up a bit further, you move up to loving beautiful souls. So you get so you stop looking just at physical appearance and you start looking beyond that to internal beauty, appreciating the beauty of a soul, personality, and virtues. That seems kind of a bit more, maybe you might say that more mature, more rounded. But then he says kind of more pure love goes beyond that to love of beautiful laws and institutions. And this is starting to seem a bit strange. Is he talking about love? Suddenly it seems like an unusual person who loves laws, who loves government. Maybe we can imagine people who love government and love laws. We have recently had the big, beautiful bill, which seems to indicate a sort of Platonic idea that laws can be beautiful. Then moving on from that, you have a love of knowledge and the sciences. So it's like the contemplating the beauty of knowledge, and that's seen to be a very important idea. Just finding knowledge beautiful. And this seems like a long way from the first rung of just loving a single body. It's like a very sort of abstract level. And then the ultimate level of beauty is just the form of beauty itself. So just in some sense, and this seems totally abstract, understanding or kind of coming into an intellectual appreciation of absolute eternal beauty, some kind of unchanging perfect form. So the idea is that as you try to become a more purified self, you stop being focused on beautiful bodies and you start being focused on the most abstract levels of beauty. So that leads us to kind of thinking about Plato's legacy. We've seen how in some ways his views are quite closely tied to early Christian thought. The idea of a one single God rather than many gods, and one supreme God. So he kind of sort of lays the foundations for early Christian theology. We've seen he has extravagant metaphysics, believing in the world of forms, which not only can you not see, but can only be understood through intellectual thought and is in your soul even before you're born. On the downside, if the other ones were positive, and that maybe we might debate about that, but certainly it seems to be a problem that he is totally, he just doesn't think that sensory experience gives you anything very significant. So it seems like his attitude would inhibit the progress of science. It would seem like it would be pretty much anti-scientific. And then there's his dualisms, and certainly his dualism between mind and body has had like a lot of influence. And similarly, his dualism between like the realm of the forms and the physical world has also had a lot of influence.